I'm Christopher C. York, instructor of philosophy at Langara College.
And I'm Zan Plesner. I'm a student at Langara College.
And this is Synthesis and Sophistry.
So today, on our series of just joyful, wonderful topics, we're talking about Thomas Nagel's essay, War and Massacre. We're going to get into details about justifying warfare and conflicts. So Nagel, in this article, is setting up the different justifications people have in conflicts. The regular one that he talks about is the utilitarian justification, which is usually there's a means that we're taking to some sort of ends. So the classic example is the bombing of Hiroshima. They wanted the Japanese to surrender, so in order for that to happen, the means was dropping the bomb.
And of course, it's important to note that this has been disputed since then, right?
Yes.
That this was overkill by most people's measure of what it would have taken to have ended the war. So that doesn't really wash unless you add other consequentialist considerations like its deterrence effect on Russian advancement on the Asian continent into China, for example, or you add in other things like, well, we needed a field test for this very, very important weapon for humanity going forward. So some sort of weirdo rationale along those lines. But that's not convincing. And of course, there are, even though utilitarian or consequentialist reasoning is the sort of default mode for military thinking, which you can kind of understand, right? When you take the bunker on that hill, here's what you do: take the bunker. Not a lot of time to build in moral considerations in the heat of battle, right, is what most military folks will tell you. Yeah. But nevertheless, I mean, that doesn't mean that bad things aren't done in wartime. I mean, it's more the norm than the exception that we have some sort of atrocity occurring in wartime. So I think what Nagel is doing is providing us with a
alternative?
Well, I mean, again, he doesn't provide it as an alternative, but more of like a limitation on utilitarian thinking, right?
Yeah.
Which is the absolutist position.
Yes. Yeah. He lays out the difference. He says utilitarian thinking in warfare is concerned with what will happen, and the absolutist position is concerned with what one is doing.
So in other words, it's constantly in effect, right? The absolutist cap on the range of acceptable moral actions stays in effect. Regardless of what your temporary objective is, you could have any number of, consequentialist outcomes you're pursuing. The absolutist limitations stay in effect regardless. So, we've talked about utilitarianism before. I think everyone knows, we're looking for the greatest good for the greatest number as a general formula for what utilitarian thinkers propose as the right action. Absolutist thinking is along the lines of Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, right? The moral duty applies to all people in all times, in all situations, and we can't escape it. And if we think hard enough about what it is we're doing, we should be able to reason our way to these absolute moral duties. And thou shalt not kill happens to be one of those absolutist moral duties.
Yeah. I guess I was wondering about that because...
or not kill unnecessarily.
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
Let's put the caveat on there.
Yeah. He's not saying that combatants can't kill each other, but he is worried about non-combatants. And,
yes.
One thing that he does in this article that I really like...
that's why he says he offers a qualified defense of absolutism on page 478, right? So because if you're a utilitarian all the way down, you'll find yourself advocating mass murder at a certain point, right? Like the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki for the sake of some greater good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, yeah, I mean, if you're an absolutist, you're going to say no killing ever. But this is a so-called qualified defense.
Yeah. He says at 478.
Soft absolutism?
Yeah,
Can
because
we call it that?
he said one absolute position that creates no problem for interpretation is pacifism. The view that one may not kill another person under any circumstances, no matter what good would be achieved or evil averted thereby.
Versus the idea of a just war with absolute restrictions.
Yes. So he's arguing for the second, right?
Yes.
Pacifism is probably too black and white and not useful in looking at actual conflicts. One objection that he looks at is people will say that this sort of absolutist position is the person trying to keep their hands clean, or the entity trying to keep their hands clean. They're not looking at the realpolitik of the situation. But he addresses this by saying that this position, the absolutist position, the keeping the hands clean is not the source of the obligation.
Yeah, he says the impurity stems from the logically prior wrongness of murder, right? But this leads to a paradox, right? In that if we are justified in sacrificing our moral integrity, then our moral integrity is preserved, which is an odd sort of position to end up in. So what does he mean by that, do you think? He says that if we are justified in sacrificing our moral integrity, then our moral integrity is preserved. This is at the bottom of 480.
Yeah, so what I take him to say there is that we're trying to go beyond moral integrity in order to meet some favorable ends that would be morally better. So I think what he's saying is that that's kind of contradictory, right? We're trying to use morality and go beyond morality to create a more moral condition. Which, yeah, I guess is that just a problem with utilitarian ethics in general?
The problem
that you are trying to go beyond morality in order to create more moral ends.
I mean, I think that if you really are a hardcore utilitarian, you'll bite the bullet and you'll say, yeah, we have to do things that on other moral systems appear morally problematic, but if you crunch the numbers, you'll find that this is what had to be done. I think that's what it means to be a utilitarian, is biting that bullet. And I think that there are few people who are willing or equipped to bite that bullet. It's moving very quickly, and our teeth are fragile. So I think that not many people these days, maybe Peter Singer excluded, are willing to take on all the philosophical baggage that comes with being accused of utilitarianism. But I think I've found the passage that's in question here. He says, there are two confusions behind the view that moral self-interest underlies moral absolutism, right? The self-interest of keeping your hands clean. First is a confusion that suggests the need to preserve one's moral purity might be the source of an obligation. For if by committing murder, one sacrifices one's moral purity or integrity, that can only be because there is already something wrong with murder. The general reason against committing murder cannot, therefore, be merely that it makes one an immoral person. Secondly, the notion that one might sacrifice one's moral integrity justifiably in the service of a sufficiently worthy end is an incoherent notion, for if one were justified in making such a sacrifice, or even morally required to make it, then one would not be sacrificing one's moral integrity by adopting that course. One would be preserving it. So I think he's done a good job here of sort of analyzing some of the inconsistencies in people's justifications for or their positions with regards to doing violence in wartime.
Yeah, I agree. I quite liked that passage, right? Like there's some barriers that we just shouldn't go past. And I think most people would accept that, right? In thinking about morality.
I think that you hinted earlier that the contribution here kind of lies in this distinction that he draws between enemies that he considers legitimate targets of violence and illegitimate targets of violence. I think that's one of the, because people who say, look, casualties are inevitable in warfare, they're going to occur, and you might as well just soak that up as part of the utilitarian calculus and say, the ends are justify the means, and yes, our tanks rolled over some civilians when we retook the town, but that's just the price of doing business, of liberating towns. What do you make of this distinction?
Yeah, I mean, I quite like it because it can be fairly muddy sometimes. In warfare, the non-combatants versus combatants, and I think sometimes there is vagueness around this that serves a purpose. People will try to argue in this sort of vagueness, and he clears this up by talking about, it's at the bottom of 485 here. So we must distinguish combatants from non-combatants on the basis of their immediate threat or harmfulness. I do not claim that line is a sharp one, but it is not so difficult as is often supposed to place individuals on one side of it or the other. Children are not combatants, even though they may join the armed forces if they are allowed to grow up. Women are not combatants just because they bear children or offer comfort to soldiers. More problematic are the supporting personnel, whether in or out of uniform, from drivers of munitions trucks and army cooks to civilian munitions workers and farmers. He goes on to say the distinction here that's important is the sort of directness to military combat, right? Non-combatants can still provide the means of existence for soldiers, and we shouldn't target them.
Yeah, he says that you should look at the cause of danger and not at what's peripheral. This is 486. Yeah. So I guess the moral status of a truck that's delivering food to the front lines is different at the point where it enters into the war zone. Yeah. So maybe outside of the war zone, outside of the front lines, it has the status of a civilian vehicle. Does it change when it actually is on the front lines? Is it now part of the danger that's being presented? Could the food truck be weaponized? Like, is it a legitimate target now that it's in the fray, so to speak?
Yeah, I think he would say no, right? Because he's just providing the means of existence for soldiers, this food truck, rather than actively being a combatant. And I like that he draws that line. I think that makes sense, at least to me.
I mean, it's interesting that the line that he draws is strictly, I mean, it's sexist and ageist in that it keeps women and children as categories of people completely out of the equation as combatants. But of course, as we know, there is such a thing as child soldiers in the various civil unrests of different African nations, and as well the Hitler Youth was also a pretty well known and
I have both these things written in my notes.
Oh,
That's
good.
Funny.
Yeah. Well, not funny, tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah. We certainly. But I mean, and as well, I mean, for the Russian side of World War II, there were plenty of women on the front lines fighting. So it really does depend on the nature of the particular conflict. I don't think there are these hard and fast lines. You say, well, as a child, that's always not going to be a target. But if the child's coming at you with machine gun and grenades, then it's going to be very tough to argue that they're a non-combatant. at that point.
Yeah. This does get to a problem, I think, with his approach, right? Because he is very Kantian. He's saying that these combatants, by treating them as ends in themselves when they're coming after us in conflict, we're respecting their humanity in a way by engaging them on the same level as they're engaging us. It's kind of that golden rule, right? Where if someone's doing something to you, if you were in their position, you would want to do the same thing, right? The child soldier muddies this because they're not fully rational, and that's important in Kant's formulation of what an end in themselves is, right?
Yes. I mean, these considerations lead us to what I think might be one of the more striking quotes from the book or from the article. He says that as a tentative effort to explain his position, he tries to connect absolutist limitations, this is in the bottom of page 483, with the possibility of justifying to the victim what is being done to them. If one abandons a person in the course of rescuing several others from a fire or a sinking ship, one could say to them, "You understand, I have to leave you to save the others." Similarly, if one subjects an unwilling child to a painful surgical procedure, one can say to him, "If you could understand, you would realize that I'm doing this to help you." And here's where it gets interesting. One could even say, and this is on page 484, as one bayonets an enemy soldier, "It's either you or me." But one cannot really say while torturing a prisoner, "You understand, I have to pull your fingernails because it is absolutely essential that we have the names of your Confederates." Nor can one say to the victims of Hiroshima, "You understand, we have to incinerate you to provide the Japanese government with an incentive to surrender." And this leads up to his conclusion. To treat someone else horribly puts you in a special relation to him, which may have to be defended in terms of other features of your relation to him. If the justification for what one did to another person had to be such that it could be offered him specifically, rather than just to the world at large, that would be a significant source of restraint. So here the thought experiment is, think about what you're about to do in the battlefield. Can you justify it specifically to the person you're about to do it to? Why you're doing it? And if you can't, maybe you oughtn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, it's kind of a very humanistic approach to it, where you're respecting other people's humanity in that, right? It really boils down to that golden rule of do unto others as they would to you, or rather the silver rule, don't do unto others what you would not want done to you. Which brings me to a thought experiment that has helped me clarify my views on conflict, right? Where, say, in order to end the war, you want to kill 10,000, say, just arbitrary number like that, of the enemy's non-combatants, so you can completely end the war. Would you do that to your own people, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so that makes it a bit like, so you put the price on your own bank account rather than theirs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How many of my own people would I sacrifice to end this conflict?
Yeah.
Huh.
And if I'm willing to do that to the other side, why is that, right? At some level, we're not respecting their humanity in the same way that we're respecting our own people's humanity, right?
So there's some sort of special pleading, or there's some sort of implicit bias at work that makes our lives worth more than their lives, from a sort of the point of view of a meaningful political division.
Yeah, and this goes back to the Hitler Youth, right? Or maybe the other side has some awful views that are terrible, but that doesn't mean we should allow killing them, right?
Well, that's the worrying thing, right? If you have somebody who uses your thought experiment, I mean, Hitler was quite willing to sacrifice the entirety of the German nation he thought that they failed to live up to their national potential, right? And therefore they brought about their own suffering on Hitler's view. So I feel like if you put your thought experiment in the hands of a sufficiently deranged person, they were like, yes, I'll sacrifice all of my people if necessary to win this war. So you're kind of presuming a sort of psychological profile that is relatively healthy and well calibrated. Not every national leader has proven to have those characteristics of caring for their own people. Yeah. Think about, like, I don't know, the French kings, for example, that eventually their line was ended because of their lack of concern for their own citizens. So I think that maybe this idea that we care for our own people more than other people's people, that's kind of new. Like, I think it's mostly been rulers versus citizens for the most of human history. And it's only with the rise of liberal democratic government and the concomitant people pleasing and humanitarian window dressing that's put on that makes that the case now. I don't think it was the case for most of human history, sadly, right? I mean, of course, we wouldn't need to end if every monarchy was a benevolent dictatorship that looked out for the well-being of the peasantry. I'm sure that we would never had to have revolted against them, but as it turns out, a lot of monarchies had to be forcibly evicted from their castles in order for things like Western liberal democracy to blossom and take root.
Yeah, and I think this gets to a problem with warfare in general, but I think with Nagel, it's because he talks about fighting dirty, right?
Yes.
And this made me think of playing Monopoly.
Okay.
If you're the only Kantian,
I don't think you can play Monopoly clean, can you?
Well, if you're the one person in a group of 5 people playing Monopoly who does not break the rules, that's going to be a terrible game of Monopoly for you when everyone else is, taking 100 here or there, or, making dirty deals with each other.
Who are you playing Monopoly with? These are monsters.
Awful people.
These are moral monsters.
Well, I'm not a Kantian, so I'm okay.
You take 100 here or there?
Yeah.
You're one of those ones.
But if you want to adopt Nagel's view in the metaphor of Monopoly here, right, where you strictly adhere to the rules, once other people are breaking those rules, you kind of get that prisoner's dilemma, right? And this is the problem with warfare in general, right? And we have guidelines and war crimes, but once people go beyond those, it's really hard to take this absolutist position. 2
war wrongs don't make a war right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. To put a certain rhetorical swing to it. I read this book at one time called War in the Pacific, and it describes the sort of level of barbarism that American soldiers sort of descended to when they were met with strong Japanese resistance in their island hopping campaign. And, you have these boys from the Midwest, fresh-faced and excited for the grand adventure they're about to go on, getting on their troop ships, and then within 2 months they're collecting ears and putting them on necklaces. And, it's wild how quickly the veneer of civilization just rapidly disintegrates on point of contact with the enemy. Just to define our terms, when you mentioned fighting dirty, Nagel defines that on page 481 as direct hostility on an improper object. So the example I think that he gives later on is if someone's coming at you with a machine gun and grenades, right? Fighting dirty would be killing their family to sap their morale instead of firing them directly, maybe because their position is too strong, or their weapons are too good, or whatever. Versus fighting clean, right, which would be direct hostility on a proper object. And presumably a proper object is someone who is an adult, who can rationally consent to the risks of being a soldier, and has decided to enter into an almost contractual relationship of accepting the possibility of their own death by seeking yours.
Yeah. 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 And I guess this goes back to legitimate targets, right? Like, it doesn't make sense for Mike Tyson to, well, I guess he's getting up there himself, but say in his prime, it doesn't make sense for him to get in the ring with a 5-year-old or someone who's in their 80s.
Right. So that's an improper object for hostility.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are also improper means, right? So there's there's impropriety with regard to means. So he talks a little bit about, weapons that do not distinguish between proper and improper targets. And those are improper means of warfare, which is important for the considerations that we were discussing, right? With nuclear war, that is an indiscriminate means of warfare that is not permissible because you're bound. There's no way to just nuke one person, right? There's no nuke that small. Yeah. So you're gonna, have civilian casualties as a necessary, let's say, consequence of employing that kind of warfare. And the same thing with landmines. Once you set a landmine and walk away, you can't control who and when it is detonated by. You can increase the odds of it meeting its military purpose by planting them near a military base, but you're not going to stop a child or a goat herd from accidentally tripping it. And so this is also included as one of the unacceptable means of warfare on these lights.
Yeah, I was thinking, again, like, I think metaphors really help me think about this article. I was thinking about someone who might get, like, sucker punched at the bar. You shouldn't just start swinging wildly around. You should be targeting the person who hit you back, right? If they put if their partner gets involved, you don't hit their partner. You're directing your aggression towards the person.
Again, I have to ask, what bars are you going to there?
Just awful, seedy, terrible bars.
Maybe if you were nicer at Monopoly, this wouldn't happen.
You know what? I'll reap what I sow when it comes to Monopoly.
I take your point, though, right? I mean, you can understand the urge to lash out blindly in anger, but you can't rationally justify it.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't just tear down the bar and everyone in it.
Shouldn't have hit that guy, as it turns out, from a consequentialist point of view. But I mean, in terms of, I think, looking at, let's think about combatants again, instead of means of war, right? There's an interesting distinction that's made on page 486. They're talking about, like, treating the enemy, giving them medical care after an engagement. And so the distinction here, and I'll read the passage I'm talking about. There's a special status of medical personnel wounded in warfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I believe this is because medical attention is a species of attention to completely general human needs, not specifically the needs of a combat soldier. And our conflict with the soldier is not with his existence as a human being. And of course, this is a strange passage. And it took me a while to sort of, like, figure out what he was saying, but I think it's this, right? We have general moral duties to all human beings, and that includes to give medical treatment and food and water and shelter to that human. We protect their interests as qua human. But when they become a combatant, we have to suspend those considerations temporarily. But once they're taken out of action, either by being wounded or by surrendering, then they stop being combatants, they stop being soldiers, and they start just being humans again. And so our proper moral attitude towards them as a non-combatant is, of course, going to have a different set of appropriate responses on our side of the equation once we make that distinction correctly.
Yeah.
Where it's tricky, though, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no.
Where it's tricky, though, is like in cases like Vietnam, which he discusses, right, where the civilian population and the warring population are intermixed. Right, where you could have a woman pushing what looks like a baby carriage, past military personnel, and all of a sudden everybody explodes, baby and woman and carriage and military personnel. And I think that's why, I mean, at least from the American point of view, that's why they were so inclined to commit atrocities in Vietnam, is because they had this sort of general kind of feeling that they didn't know where the next danger was coming from. Because all of these nice, moral, absolutist views that some people in the West share were not shared by the Vietnamese people resisting the Americans. They just wanted them out. And the cost in lives didn't seem to be the important part. The important part seemed to be removing the colonial oppressors or the people who are waging war in their country. Yeah. So they're beyond. I mean, at that point, moral philosophy or whatever considerations of just war are out the window. And we enter into what some philosophers have called total war. Yeah. Right, where you're just aiming for each other's extinction, which of course is horrifying. No one wants to be in that position. Yeah. Right? And I feel like once you get to that stage, you're kind of in Nagel's nightmare. Right? He never wants us to get to that point, if possible, because he thinks that at the underlying point of his article seems to be, if we ever descend to that kind of no holds barred military engagement with each other, we lose what makes us human. Yeah. Right? We become barbarous. We become animal-like. Yeah. Everything good about us is sacrificed.
Yeah, this really just gets to the prisoner's dilemma, right? Where I'll try and recall the thought experiment properly. It's, say, a friend and I are both going to get jail time. We can agree that if we both plead guilty, we'll both get a year. If I plead guilty and he doesn't, then I get to go free. If both of us, no, I'm f***ing it up.
It's easy to do unless you have the numbers in front of you. Yeah. So the police get you. They accuse you of this crime. They make you a deal. You go free if you rat at your friend, and they don't rat you out. But they get 5 years if they don't rat you out, and you do rat them out. The same deal's made to them, right? So assuming that nobody rats each other out, they'll get you on a lesser charge, as the sort of thought experiment goes, and you both get 1 year. But that's if you both shut your mouths completely and trust the other person to do the same. If anybody betrays the other person, that person goes to jail for 5 years and the other one goes free. So you're in a sort of position where you have reasons to want to screw the other person over, and you're only restrained by the fact that you know that they are also in the position of wanting to screw you over. Yes, exactly. So it may be restraint or fear or maybe hope that leads you to the best result. Because if you both rat each other out, you're both going to spend 10 years in jail. Yeah. So it's the worst possible outcome.
Yeah. And it seems to me like the more that we're doing this sort of tit for tat behavior, we start to go down the line, and it snowballs into this worse and worse prisoner's dilemma.
Right, where it's just retribution on retribution on retribution. Yeah. You screwed me over in the first iteration, therefore I'm going to screw you over in the second iteration. Interestingly enough, though, in the game theory studies, they've showed that this kind of retribution only works in the short term because people get tired of screwing each other over. Mm-hmm. And so at a certain point, somebody has to put the olive branch forward and try to restore some kind of trust, and therefore reduce the punishment, make the sort of average score higher than it would normally be in terms of like years not spent in prison. Yeah. So this is what they call the iterated prisoner's dilemma. If you keep making the same choice, the logic of it differs. One-time prisoner's dilemma, betrayal is the sort of optimal or dominant strategy. If you know you're going to be playing the same game with people over time, people tend to coordinate on cooperation rather than competition.
Yeah. Again, I think this is where Kantian ethics actually does have its strength, right? With the monopoly example, if I know that you're going to cheat every time, I'm not going to play games with you anymore. Right.
That's where I'm at with it. That's why I was so damning about the Monopoly position. I'm not going to play Monopoly now. I think Monopoly is a bad game for different reasons. But I would never play Monopoly anyway, but I especially wouldn't play Monopoly with people I knew cheated at it.
Yeah.
That's like playing a bad game with bad people.
Yeah.
I've got better things to do.
Yeah. I guess warfare is a little bit different here, where you don't have a choice sometimes to.
You're playing Monopoly.
Yeah. You're tied down, but again, it's that sort of an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. At some point, the buck has to stop, and I guess. That's where the humanism comes in here, right? Where if we respect the other person or other side's humanity, then there is a need where we do a minimal level of harm, and our conflict is directed in that sort of way where it's proportional.
Yeah, my problem with like relying on this sense of what the human is as a sort of basis for our moral convictions, it's always worried me for a couple of reasons, which I'll explain. The first of which is that it sort of is borrowed from theology, right? Because, we are created in the image of a God, under certain theistic convictions. That's what makes us worthy of moral consideration. If you make it secular and not theistic, it's our unique human characteristics like our rationality. But people have proved that they are capable of abandoning rational thought. They've proved that, I think, we are not necessarily any kind of image of divine entity. In fact, a lot of us take on demonic characteristics with our behavior. So the idea that we preserve respect for other people simply on the basis of human dignity has always seemed to me kind of a benighted view. We don't know why. We just take it on authority. Oh, well, they're a human there. We've got to treat them special. But no one really analyzes why that's the case. Mm-hmm. So, appeals to human dignity, I think that maybe they're rhetorically useful, in terms of like keeping people's action in check, or they're a shorthand for why we should criticize people. But maybe for me, like the silver rule is just way more convincing. Like you wouldn't want to be put in a bamboo cage and submerged underwater. Maybe you shouldn't do it to your prisoner, right? Yeah. Because, and again, that relies more on, human sentiments, I suppose, or maybe just kind of non-pathological view of a human as a social being with a certain amount of natural, let's say, sympathy. I think that's maybe more, I rely on sociological and anthropological factors more than images of a human as a divinely created entity or a perfectly reasoning and rational being.
Yeah. The philosopher, his name is, I'm drawing a blank on it right now. I'll put it in post, but
just give me the description. I'll see if I can guess.
I'm
being quizzed on live on the podcast.
He's a modern philosopher, and he completely doesn't believe in human rights because he thinks every time that if we rely on them, we can look back through history where they've been a thing, and every time a conflict gets dire enough, they get overstepped, and these people don't fit into that category of human, or people become dehumanized.
Never mind philosophers. There are lots of dictators, that rule illiberal, undemocratic countries that would be happy to tell you that human rights are a legal fiction, and they're happy to ignore them. Yeah. If there's a philosopher who's willing to be the mouthpiece for those people, so much the worse for that philosopher. But no one springs to mind. So you've stumped me.
I don't believe he's like he's advocate. I think he's trying to bring us a better alternative. I forget what that alternative is at the moment, but yeah. Anyway,
a purely legislative answer to why you shouldn't torture other human beings is not going to have any moral relevance. That's for sure, right? You have to sort of buy in on a different ground, I think, because again, as you pointed out, like, as soon as the fear of punishment is removed, or as soon as your own well-being is threatened, that will be jettisoned rather quickly. So we can't count on that to keep us in check. Yeah. All right, criticisms. Criticisms of Nagel. Do you have any, or did he just wow you? Did he just dazzle you with his brilliance?
I think my main criticism is my criticism with Kantian ethics in general, right? Where if you're the only Kantian in the room, that puts you in a really bad position, and sometimes an untenable one, right? If you are a nation that is a small nation that's being attacked by a really large one, and you want to try to adhere to these sort of principles that Nagel has laid out, that's going to end really bad for you if that really powerful nation doesn't adhere to those sort of rules.
Right, and that's the defense of the Viet Cong, right? They're fighting a technologically and economically stronger nation in the Vietnam War, so they will use any means that are available to them to affect their freedom from that nation. So, yeah, you might say that ethics are, once again, this seems to be a sort of theme that we keep bumping up against. Ethics are the luxury of the more powerful combatants.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is why I think the UN in general is a good thing, because
but doesn't the UN enshrine and protect the interests of the most powerful nations?
Yeah, but at some level, like it is imperfect, but those nations need to be held accountable some way, and by having at least some sort of checks.
Yeah,
though maybe they're more symbolic than anything.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, I think we can't talk about the UN without sort of recognizing that its ability to enforce international law and to rein in rogue nations doesn't have a great track record necessarily, and it has been accused of serving the interests of powerful nations at the expense of less powerful member states. Does that mean I think that the UN shouldn't exist? No, I think it's probably like we need more efforts towards effective global governance. But I mean, it's very difficult at that level to completely write out power politics out of the equation.
Yeah,
there's
definitely
enormous, economic and political forces at work.
Yeah,
and so it's no surprise that some of the actions and decisions of the UN's governing council has been roundly criticized.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think my politics are pretty cynical, but the principle itself of keeping having people be accountable for war crimes and stuff like that is something that I agree we need to fight for and try and uphold.
Yeah, I guess the thing is like there always seem to be more recriminations for the war crimes of the losing countries' forces. Not many Allied leaders brought to court after World War II, for example.
Yeah.
Even though it's acknowledged, right, that they're war criminals on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not saying obviously that. Obviously, we both had a favorite in that conflict, and happy it came out the way it did. But just like, I don't know, the firebombing of Dresden, the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there were excesses there towards the end of the war, especially once the Allies, and the Allies were enraged and wanted to make a real point, and they did, but at the cost of a tremendous amount of civilian life.
Yes.
So we can't forget that. We can't just whitewash history and say Hitler bad, Allies good. Mm-hmm. Hitler was bad. Some Allies also made choices that would have resulted in atrocities, and that's why, of course, you have who is it now? Just Anscombe, I believe, who protests against Truman getting his honorary doctorate. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I guess just on this point, I guess that's why we need, for me, I think ideally we need a system in place where we're not just devolving into that sort of tit for tat thing. And though I find maybe Nagel to be a bit idealistic here, I I think we need to be idealistic when it comes to conflict. At some
That's a great
level.
quote.
Because if we're just doing realpolitik all the day, then we're just signing off on utilitarian means to an end. Everything's justified in warfare, which can't be the case.
Yeah, that way he is trying to find a different way. He is trying to work us out of a system of thought and belief that will just lead us from massacre to massacre. And so, like I say, I think his distinction between legitimate and illegitimate means of conducting warfare and legitimate and illegitimate targets of violence, very useful terminology. One thing I worry about, and this is maybe as a minor, again, philosophical worry, not at the realm of policy, but when he talks about qualified absolutism, that seems like a very strange term to me, right? So, and we've talked about absolutism, moral absolutism, like it's categorically wrong to do X. No human should ever do X under any circumstances. Qualified absolutism, it's a weird idea. Is it absolute or is it not? Is it qualified? Is it qualified in terms of its scope or qualified in terms of the kinds of things that the kinds of, let's say, situations or entities it takes under consideration? Does that make sense to you? Does the idea of a qualified absolutism make any sense? It's kind of like saying capped infinity.
Yeah.
Well, where do you cap it?
It's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, is there... for me, maybe it's just a terminology thing. I found it kind of I found it clunky and distracting.
Yeah, me too. I don't know why he used the term absolute instead of deontology here.
Yeah, but I mean, even deontology is going to lead us to a set of absolutist moral duties. So I mean, they're interchangeable in terms of that. But it's kind of like it's like saying moderate extremism or something.
Yeah.
Like
maybe it is. This goes deeper than just terms. I haven't thought it through yet, but yeah, I guess that might point to something, right? If he wants to say that it's okay here but not there, maybe that is inconsistent. If we go deeper, I haven't thought about it that deeply enough, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, he is talking about some absolute restrictions on behavior. Like he says, for example, that torture is never justifiable. Massacre of innocents is never justifiable. So I guess those are the absolutes. I think maybe he was talking about qualified absolutism. He's like, this kind of killing. Like, he's okay with killing, but just this kind of killing is never justifiable. But then why is any kind of killing justifiable, right? So if killing is bad, morally bad, I don't know. I think maybe that does commit you to pacifism, doesn't it? I mean, it's kind of like saying, well, I'm a vegetarian, but I eat hamburgers on Thursdays, right? I mean, you're not really a vegetarian, are you?
Yeah.
Right? I don't believe in violence, except for people in uniforms who've agreed to kill each other. Well, okay, you got to explain that more and more clearly, more deeply and more clearly.
Yeah. I think there's always going to be vagaries, and this might not having the absolute doesn't deal with those in an adequate way. I have this highlighted. I'm not sure if this will be helpful, but what absolutism forbids is doing certain things to people rather than bringing about certain results. Not everything that happens to others as a result of what one does is something that one has done to them.
Right. That seems, again, like a bit of sophistry, right? Like, it's kind of like saying something bad might happen to you, but I might not do it, right? What is that? Where's that page again?
That's the very top of 480, the beginning of section 4.
So let's read the passage after to give more context. The absolutist focus on actions rather than outcomes does not merely introduce a new outstanding item into the catalog of evils. That is, it does not say that the worst thing in the world is the deliberate murder of innocent person. For if that were all, then one could presumably justify one such murder on the ground that it would prevent several others. Right, and this is the sort of theme of the ones who walk away from Omelas, right? Yep. I won't have a utopia if it means that one child suffers. Or 10,000 on the ground, they would prevent 100,000 more. That is a familiar argument, but if this is allowable, then there is no absolute prohibition against murder after all. Absolutism requires that we avoid murder at all cost, not that we prevent it at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading this line and kind of scratching my head, and I guess this is where I share your intuition about his term absolutism here, right?
There's something fishy happening around this section. I guess what he's saying, right, is that if we are interested in preventing murders, then we kill all killers or people that have threatened to kill. Right? If we like it's the sort of judge death scenario, right? Where like, okay, I want to be the best. I want to prevent all crimes. What's the best way to prevent all crimes? Kill all humans. Right there, I've prevented all crimes. By definition, I've done the right thing. If that's your only goal and your only value, right? That's the from the Judge Dredd 200 AD comic series in the UK. Very deep cut. Yeah. But here, right, looking at so preventing crime at all costs would mean killing all potential criminals. We don't want that. Instead, what we want to do is avoid murder. Yeah. So that means, insofar as it's possible for you, try not to kill. And I think what he's saying is that in that situation where you're in a war against a hostile enemy nation, it is no longer possible to avoid murder. Mm. Like, you're going to have to murder or die. And in that case, you can't avoid murder, so maybe it's not morally desirable, but it's something you have to do. And it might leave you with moral remainder, right? Mm-hmm. And presumably it would. Yeah. If you're in a war, I mean, a lot of people don't like to talk about it after they come back from a war. They probably had to do stuff they're not proud of or that, disturbs them. And so they just a lot of the veterans keep quiet about what they've done. So they don't feel great about it. Not many veterans feel great about it. Yeah. Because they couldn't avoid murdering. Yeah, yeah. And they probably see it like that, right? I had to do some terrible things. I think it's only maybe young, naive, recruits like you'd see in All Quiet on the Western Front, the first half of the movie. They see the nobility and the valor of warfare. And they're seduced by an ideology or an idea. And I think it's only that class of combatant that goes to war with any hope or any expectation of glory. Yeah. Most people have to get forced into battling for their lives and taking others' lives. Mm-hmm. I think he's referring to that here, but I'm not sure. Yeah, yeah.
No, that's kind of what I get from it, right? Where, the Judge Dredd example is a perfect example. Like, he's not saying that we should prevent before the fact by killing. It's only once we're in that situation that it's no longer avoidable, that we're justified in killing.
Yeah, it's just being say looking for trouble rather than handling trouble when you're confronted by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Some people go looking for trouble.
Yeah, and I think I'm sympathetic to this view where I'm not in favor of the war on terror, right? Because this seems to be that sort of trying to prevent something that has not yet happened.
Right, or waging war on an ideology rather than a concrete enemy. Yeah. And so like the war on drugs, because it's an idea that you're fighting, it's an interminable conflict with no endpoint. Yeah. It can be extended for as long as you want to politically extend it. So it's very, it plays into the interests of people who are benefiting from the military economic complex. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're starting to get in on time, but just one last thing for criticisms. I'm not sure if this will be fruitful, but I guess going back to that idea of legitimate targets and child soldiers, I think are a problem for his argument here. Or nowadays, things like AI and drone pilots, the level of removal. It gets harder, I guess, to have directness that having a soldier that is coming at you with a bayonet does, where there is that sort of Kantian, I'm going to respect your humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more appropriate to label a child soldier as a weapon than a soldier, because they're being used as a weapon to further somebody else's ideology and reflecting other people's desires and interests. They're less than pawns in this, right? They're fodder. Does that mean that they can be treated with no regard to their humanity? No, but there they are. Let's say possibly attacking you on the battlefield. It's just another one of those situations where you can no longer avoid murder, and sadly, you defending yourself might mean you murdering a child. Yeah, which is it's a bitter pill to swallow, and damn the person on the other side who forced you into that situation. Yeah, despite whatever political aims they're trying to advance and however desperate their nation may be, damn them for doing that.
Yeah, I guess this isn't a problem for Nagel as much as it is just unfortunate and tragic.
Yeah, I mean, my point before about him roping off, women and children as non-combatants, I guess it's a cheap surface shot I was taking, because I think he just was exhibiting a little bit of sexism and in sort of like laziness in making those kind of categories.
Yeah, I guess this just reflects his time period, but also maybe
Nagel not woke. Hashtag Nagel not woke.
But I guess this wider criticism of just positing humanity and not really going into what that means, right? I guess you could expand this criticism to that, right? Where pointing to things like humanism can be a problem, but.
A challenging read, to be sure. I do like some of the distinction he raises. I think his heart's in the right place, even if sometimes I feel like his argumentation gets a little bit murky, possibly weaselly. I think that his heart's in the right place. He is aiming us towards an alternative to the absolute abandon of morality in wartime, and gives us a few interesting thought experiments as to what we could think to ourselves if we were combatants on a battlefield. He gives us the tools that we might use, like, for example, can I justify this to the person I'm fighting, to them personally, not to them from the perspective of my nation or of world peace or whatever, but as a human, can I say to that person, you get it? Yeah. Do you get it? I'm sure you get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I the main thing that really stuck out for me is I like that he kind of calls out people who say, oh, non-combatant, combatant, that's really murky water. He says, no, let's try to think about this in a deeper way and scrutinize this. Let's try to be clearer. And I think he does a good job of doing that in this. So that's my main takeaway.
Even considering the moral status of the grocery delivery truck in wartime. I mean, that's fairly fine-grained, practical considerations from a philosopher, right? Who you sort of expect to work at the highest degree of abstraction, does his best to try to make the tires hit the pavement, so to speak, and bring his theory into action. So, yeah, we're not in the market of giving grades to articles, but I think this is definitely on the positive side of the scale.
Better than Heidegger.
It's a low bar.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. So if we had let's start this now. If we had to give Nagel a grade for his article,
yeah, I think A- for me.
Okay.
I liked this article a lot. I thought he was quite clear. Few small things here and there, and like you said, maybe murky. I think the absolute might make it a bit vague. But
Yeah, I mean, definitely like B plus A minus range. So I think maybe we can go with your more charitable, generous mark, and I'm sure that Nagel or Nagel's estate will be happy to. He'll be happy to know that we've rated him as an A student.
All right, maybe that's something we need to start doing on the podcast, giving letter grades to.
It's a thing now.
Great.
We'll see you next week for more of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Sam.